Good morning. This is the fourth video on creative nonfiction, voices from the margins, a subject taught in the second semester at the Central Department of English and elsewhere as well at Tribhuvan University's MA in English Literature and Language course. In the previous videos, I talked about the word rhetoric, and I also talked in some detail about the textualized rhetorical situation. I talked about actual rhetor, implied rhetor, speech, speaker, addressee, occasion, presupposition, intended audience, and actual reader. And I started reading the essay in Unit 2, the first essay by the Korea-born American author Chang Rae Lee, and I was trying to focus on what the author says and then how the author says. And while focusing on how, I was trying to apply these rhetorical concepts on the text. And in doing so, I also talked about a lot of other features of the text. So at the end of the previous video, which stopped before I could conclude because of battery issue, I was reading paragraph 6, which begins with the word now. And I said that one important characteristic of this memoir is the flashback. The author moves back and forth between now and then. There is a point from where he is speaking and he goes to his past and brings his memories. Let me read. Now her house was full again. The word again gives a presupposition that her house was not full again previously. Her house had not been full previously. And do not forget that the theme of the magazine's issue in which this memoir was published was home. So see the presuppositional value. What is a home? Home is home when it is full of people in it. When everybody is there, home becomes home. When father, mother, son, daughter, they come together, then only home becomes home. Now her house was full again. Remarkably here, the author uses the word house and not home. My sister had just resigned from her job in New York City, and my father, who typically saw his psychiatric patients until 8 or 9 in the evening, was appearing in the driveway at 4:30. So do you see remarkable thing? The mother is sick, so the sister had to come home quitting her job. The father had to come home early. Why? To look after the sick person. Another remarkable issue that memoir might raise is what happens when somebody in the family gets quite sick, quite ill. You have to look after them, and it creates a lot of other problems, right? Okay. I had been living at home for nearly a year. So he said earlier he had left home to go to the extra school when he was 15, and he spent 10 years getting education, and then he came back around 25, and now he says that I was at home for 1 year. This essay was published in 1995. If we imagine that he had written this essay in 1995, we can say he was living at home from 1994. I'm not sure, I'm just calculating, we'll check it. I had been living at home for nearly a year and was in the final push of work on what would prove a dismal failure of a novel. So he was writing a novel for the last 1 year. When I wasn't struggling over my prose, I kept occupied with the things she usually did. So the writer did two works. Either he was busy with his creative work, writing the novel, and when he was not busy with his creative work, he would do the work that his mother did. Look, what was the work? The daily errands, the grocery shopping. So she used to go to shopping. Now she is 6, he can't go. So he would go. The vacuuming and the cleaning, and of course all the cooking. So at the heart of this essay is cooking. There is something called the framing technique. My recording had stopped in the previous video when I was talking about this thing. What is framing technique? In creative writing or in literary writing, writers begin their writing and they use a device to bring the whole diverse ideas and strands together. There will be something in the narrative that will connect all seemingly unrelated ideas. So framing technique is bringing a dominant idea or bringing a dominant image or bringing a person that is present throughout the story and that connects all other aspects of the story. And you will see that right from the beginning the author talks about eating, and he says she can't eat and she can't swallow medicine as well. So cooking is from the very beginning of this narrative. Okay, now let's move to next paragraph. Before I move to next paragraph, let me once again tell you about how he is in the present there, and he keeps moving back and forth between present and past, and he mentions about cooking. That's very important. He mentions that they were together again after 10 years. And as you can see, the paragraph has emotional appeal. It also has ethical appeal in the sense that by the time you read paragraph 6, as a reader, you may start making your view about this son, how faithful this son is. He left the city and came home to look after the mother. Now we move to paragraph 7. When I was 6 or 7 years old, I used to watch my mother as she prepared our favorite meal. So in paragraph 6, he used now, right? Now in paragraph 7, he used when I was. So do you see, in 7th paragraph, he is going to the past. In 6th paragraph, he was in the present, and he keeps moving back and forth. When I was 6 or 7 years old, I used to watch my mother as she prepared our favorite meals. It was one of my daily pleasures. She shooed me away. Shoo away means saying, no, go away, don't stay here. She shooed me away. You shoo away your children when they are in the kitchen or when you want them not to disturb you. She shooed me away in the beginning, telling me that the kitchen wasn't my place, and aiding in her half-proud, half-deprecating way. See the creative writing. We say creative writing. Look, it's how did she speak? In her half-proud and half-deprecating way that her kind of work would only serve to weaken me. So if she thought if he works in the kitchen, he'll become weak in the sense of a character. Weaken me. Go out and play with your friends, she would snap in Korean. Or better yet, do your reading and homework. She knew that I had already done both, and that as the evening approached, there was no place to go save her small and tidy kitchen, from which the clatter of the mixing bowl, see the auditory image, clatter of the mixing bowl, sound image, and pans would ring through the house. Okay, so in paragraph 7, the author goes back to the past and he remembers his age when he was just 6 or 7. And what things he remembers? He remembers how he would come in the kitchen and how the mother would ask him to spend time studying, doing homework, and then how he would like to be with the mother in the kitchen, right? So, and the last sentence says that there was no place to go save her small and tidy kitchen. So, whenever the author felt boring or whenever the author felt like playing, where did he go? He went to the kitchen. So, kitchen in this essay is used as a metaphor to frame the story. All the events in the story, they happen in the kitchen. Probably the author, when he is writing, maybe he's in the kitchen or somewhere in the kitchen. Do you see, kitchen is the space that is used as a framing technique, and cooking is the activity that is used as a framing technique, because events in the story happen around the kitchen. Okay, so let's move to next paragraph, paragraph 8. I would enter the kitchen quietly. See the language, I would enter, and pay attention, we use the conditional would to talk about discontinued past. We use conditional would to talk about our past activities that we did frequently but that we don't do now. I would enter the kitchen quietly. Where did I place my yes? I would enter the kitchen quietly and stand beside her, my chin lodging upon the point of her hip. Now look, this is a beautiful scene. Paragraph 8 presents a beautiful scene where you can see the son in the kitchen with the mother, and this is a flashback. This is a flashback. The present is painful because the mother is sick, so he resorts to the past. I would enter the kitchen quietly and stand beside her, my chin lodging upon the point of her hip. This paragraph 8 has descriptive writing. Overall, the essay is narrative, but you should understand that no writing is only narrative or descriptive, only in one mode. Writings contain the mixture of all the modes. I would enter the kitchen quietly and stand beside her, my chin lodging upon the point of her hip. He was a small child. Peering through the crook of her arm. She was working and he would look from this part. Crook of her arm. I beheld the movements of her hands. She was making food. The kalbi. What is a kalbi? Kalbi is a Korean dish, meat. If you Google and look for pictures, you will see, your mouth will water. It looks so sweet. The kalbi, she would take up a butchered short rib. Now here, this paragraph 8 is remarkable for food vocabulary, and this paragraph 8 is also remarkable for describing the process of cooking. So here in paragraph 8, you also have process mode. Let's read. For kalbi, she would take up a butchered short rib in her narrow hand. The flinty, what is flinty? Stern and unyielding. The flinty bone shaped like a section of an airplane wing. See the simile. See the simile. Shaped like a section of airplane wing. Shaped like a section of an airplane wing and deeply embedded in the gristle and flesh. What is gristle? The tough fibrous tissue that connects bone to each other. And flesh, and with the point of her knife cut so that the bone fell away, though not completely, leaving it connected to the meat by the barest opaque layer of tendon. So she would cut the meat, but she would not separate the bone and flesh. See. Then she methodically butterflied the flesh, cutting and unfolding, repeating the action until the meat lay out on her board, glistening and ready for seasoning. Seasoning is when you put spices. She scored shallow cuts on the surface of the meat. She scored it diagonally, then sifted sugar into the crevices with her pinched fingers, gently rubbing in the crystals. The sugar would tenderize as well as sweeten the meat. She did this with each rib and then set them all aside in a large shallow bowl. She minced a half dozen cloves of garlic, a stub of ginger root, sliced up a few scallions, and spread it all over the meat. She wiped her hands and took out a bottle of sesame oil, and after pausing for a moment, streamed the dark oil in 2 swift circles around the bowl. After adding a few splashes of soya sauce, she thrust her hands in and kneaded the flesh, careful not to dislodge the bones. I asked her why it mattered that they remain connected. The meat needs the bone nearby, she said, to borrow its richness. She wiped her hands clean of the marinade, except for her little finger, which she would flick with her tongue from time to time, because she knew that the flavor of a good dish developed not at once but in stages. So what do you see in this paragraph? There is food imagery. There is food imagery, there is a figure of speech, and there is a vivid description. Look, how does he say? What he says? This vivid description with food imagery, and there is a vivid process writing. And all this detail the author is remembering from his memory. It's surprising how one can remember with such a detail. And the challenging for us, the non-native readers like us, is that if you don't know the meanings of all these words, it's difficult to understand. When I was reading, I had to check all the word meanings, and I have written the word meanings in my soft copy. So hope you do the same and try to understand. So it's a long paragraph, and I said that this paragraph tells us another framing technique, that is cooking is the activity used as framing technique, and food is the item used as a framing technique, and kitchen is the place used as a framing technique. And all these things are related to mother. Who cooks? The mother. Who provides food? The mother. Who is in the kitchen? The mother. And it's important, the details here, because the issue of the magazine is home. Let's move to paragraph 9 now. Whenever I cook, now look, in paragraph 8, he was having a flashback past, paragraph 8. Paragraph 9, he comes to the present. Whenever I cook. So you will see that the author uses verbs in past simple tense as well as present simple tense. Whenever I cook, now he comes to present, I find myself working just as she would. I remembers the past, would conditional. Readying the ingredients, a mass of garlic, a julienne of red peppers, a fantels of shrimp, and piling them in little mounds about the cutting surface. My mother never left me any recipes out. This is how I learned to make her food, each dish coming not from a list or a card, but from the aromatic spread of a board. So how did he learn cooking? By looking from the crook of the mother's arm. Earlier in paragraph 7, you remember how he said, every time I had time, I would run in the kitchen, and what I would do, I would stand by my mom, and I will very carefully observe what my mom was doing. What is impressing to me in these paragraphs 7, 8, and 9 is that how do we learn best? We learn best by observing people doing things carefully. How do we learn? We learn anything by observing people doing things and by copying, by imitating what they're doing. So he says, I didn't learn these things from recipe. I learned this by watching my mom doing. So do you realize this also shows a very close bond between the son and the mother. So again in paragraph 9 also, we have food vocabulary like mass of garlic, julienne of red pepper, fantils of shrimp, etc. Paragraph 10. I have always thought it was particularly cruel that the cancer was in her stomach. I have always thought. Again now, present. Now, it is the first time in this story, in paragraph 10, that we have the word cancer for the first time. In the first paragraph, when we read that the mother could not swallow anything and could not eat, and there was a machine attached, we just made a guess what's wrong with her. Now we know. I have always thought it was particularly cruel that the cancer was in her stomach, and that for a long time. Why was it cruel? The mother was a fantastic cook. The mother was excellent at making tasty, delicious dishes, and she was not able to eat. That's what the cruel thing. One who can cook best food is not able to eat, himself or herself. Was in her stomach, and that for a long time. At the end, she couldn't eat. See the irony. She could cook food like anyone, but she could not eat. See the irony. The last meal I made for her, now past again. The last meal I made for her was on New Year's Eve 1990. Let's note down. One big challenge in this essay is keeping track of the time. Look, earlier, now I'm wrong. Earlier, I was calculating that he wrote this in 1995. He says, I've been at home for 1 year, so maybe he came home in 1994. Now look what he says. He says, the last time I made for her, the last meal I made for her was on New Year's Eve 1990. So 1990, New Year Eve, he made the last meal, and we can suppose that maybe she died that year, or maybe she died soon. So I said it's difficult to keep track of time, and I would appreciate if any of you, my students particularly, I'm making this video for them, if you can present me the time frame. The last meal I made for her was on New Year's Eve 1990. My sister suggested that instead of a rib, roast, or a bird, or the usual overflow of Korean food, we make all sorts of finger dishes that our mother might fancy and pick at. So what did they make for her? They made finger dishes thinking that the mother may like eating. Look, the love of children. They tried to make something thinking that she would love to eat. So what is in paragraph 10? Again, it has emotional appeal, because here it is the first time we read that she had got cancer in the stomach, and we also read the irony. She was a fantastic cook who could not eat herself. And we also have one more information that the last meal they made for was 1990. That means now it's quite difficult for me to decide when Chang Rae Lee wrote this memoir. Let's move ahead. Maybe we hope when we finish reading, we'll be able to guess. Paragraph 11. We set the meal out on the glass coffee table. Now past tense, paragraph 11. Paragraph 11, past. Okay, he is in the flashback. We set the meal out on the glass coffee table in the family room. I prepared a tray of smoked salmon canapes. Now another food item. Look, what is smoked salmon canapé? It is appetizer, usually toast, crackers, or bread slices with toppings. One big challenge in reading this essay is you must have a dictionary by your side, or you must Google all the meanings. Or I Google image. I use Google image, and I want to see how things look. Okay, I prepared a tray of smoked salmon canapes, fried some Korean bean cake, and made a few other dishes I thought she might enjoy. My sister supervised me while he was cooking and arranging the platters, and then with some pomp carried each dish into our parents. Finally, I brought out a bottle of champagne in a bucket of ice My mother had moved to the sofa and was sitting up, surveying the low table. It looks pretty nice, she said. I think I'm feeling hungry. So do you see? The food has been cooked by the son with the supervision of the daughter, the sister, and then they set the food on the table, all the dishes, they have made special dishes for her, and then the mother is there, the father is there, the son is there, the daughter is there, so the family is together. The family is together. That's what home is. So in one way, this memoir also tells we people who live in the cities without our parents, we live individually, alone, away from home. It might make us nostalgic because it is telling the value of being with the family. Okay. So the mother says, I'm feeling hungry, looking at the food. Now let's move to paragraph 12. This made us all feel good because mom said, maybe I feel hungry. This made us all feel good, especially me, for I could not remember the last time she had felt any hunger or had eaten something I cooked. Look, the emotional appeal. He says that I don't remember when last time I cooked something for her and she had eaten. She was having cancer, and for a long time she was not eating properly. We began to eat. My mother picked up a piece of salmon toast and took a tiny corner in her mouth. She rolled it around for a moment in the mouth. She took a tiny corner and rolled around for a moment and then pushed it out with the tip of her tongue. This is a very emotional scene, very painful scene. Look, the children spent hours making the food with the hope that mom would eat, and she took a small piece, she rolled around and she could not swallow. She could not swallow. While teaching you this paragraph, I recall one of my relatives who is having this kind of problem. One of my relatives has got cancer in the mouth and he is undergoing treatment, and now he is having a tough time and he can't swallow, he can't eat. God, when we study, when we read, it makes us remember things from our life. I have, right now I have two of my relatives undergoing treatment for cancer these days. Okay, so she can't eat, she rolls and she pushes it out. Letting it fall back onto her plate, she swallowed hard as if to quell a gag. She could not swallow. Maybe the cancer developed right up to the throat. Then glanced up to see if we had noticed. She didn't want to hurt children. She didn't want children to see that she had swallowed, she had thrown out the food. Of course, we all had seen her throwing out the food. She attempted a bean cake, some cheese, and then a slice of fruit, but nothing was any use. Look, see the painful scene. See the irony. They spent hours making food and she could not eat anything. Paragraph 13. She nodded at me anyway and said, "Oh, it's very good." But I was already feeling lost and I put down my plate abruptly. Again, past tense, flashback. I put down my plate abruptly, nearly shattering it on the thick glass. There was an ugly pause before my father asked me in a very gentle voice, ugly pause, if anything was wrong, and I answered that I answered that it was nothing. It was the last night of a long year. It was the last night of the long 1990, the New Year Eve, and we were together, and I was simply relieved. At midnight, I poured out glasses of champagne, even one for my mother, who took a deep sip. Her manner grew playful and light, and I helped her shuffle to her mattress, and she lay down in the place where in a brief week she was dead. Paragraph 13 is even more emotional because the last sentence of paragraph 13 tells that she died. Paragraph 11, Paragraph 11 introduces the fact that the mother, which paragraph tells about the cancer? Maybe 10. No. Okay. In the previous paragraph, we learned she had cancer, and now in paragraph 13, we learn that she died of cancer in a few weeks. So paragraph 13 again has emotional, and throughout this essay you will see the strongest appeal is pathos, emotional appeal. Let's go to paragraph 14. My mother could whip up most anything, but during our first years of living in this country, we ate only Korean food. Now he goes back to past and his life in America. At my harangue-like behest, what is harangue-like behest? A lengthy speech. My mother set herself to learning how to cook exotic American dishes. So the mother now learned to make some American dishes. Look, there is cultural appropriation. when you settle in a foreign country, you follow foreign culture. American dishes. Luckily, a kind neighbor, Mrs. Churchill, another lady, a tall, florid young woman with flaxen hair, taught my mother her most trusted recipes. Mrs. Churchill's two young sons, palish, weepy boys. See the creative writing. What is creative writing? See the vivid description. What makes this creative? See the description. Mrs. Churchill's two young sons, palish, weepy boys with identical crew cuts, always accompanied her, and though I liked them well enough, I would slip away from them after a few minutes, for I knew that the real action would be in the kitchen. See, the real action would be in the kitchen. And this essay recaptures and presents that real action of cooking. Where their mother was playing guiding writer's mother to make American dish. Mrs. Churchill hailed from the state of Maine, came from Maine, where the finest Swedish meatballs and tuna casserole and angel food cake in America are made. Again, see the food vocabulary. She readily demonstrated certain techniques, how to layer wet sheets of pasta for a lasagna, or whisk up a simple rocks. I won't explain these. I can't explain these things here. You Google and check in Google Images and see all these things. For example, she often brought gift shoe boxes containing curious ingredients like dried oregano, instant yeast, and cream of mushroom soup. The two women, though at ease and jolly with each other, had difficulty communicating, language problem. And this was made worse by the often confusing terminology of Western cuisine. For example, corned beef, deviled eggs. Although I was just learning the language myself, English, I would gladly play the interlocutor. What is an interlocutor? One who can mediate between they speak two different languages. Jumping back and forth between their places at the counter, dipping my fingers into whatever sauce lay out. Okay. I was an instant child, and being my mother's firstborn, much too prized. Maybe I have misnumbered the paragraphs. I'll comment here. So again in paragraph 14, you see Mrs. Churchill guiding author's mother to make American dishes, and you can see how he says that I didn't like playing with her sons. I would go in the kitchen because the real action was there, and I would watch my mom cooking. What I like in this essay about this character, this narrator, this rhetor is his habit of paying attention to what people are doing and learning from them. Okay, let me read next paragraph. I was an insistent child. I was an insistent child, and being my mother's firstborn, much too prized. My mother could say no. My mother could say no to me, and did often enough, but anyone who knew us, particularly my father and sister, could tell how much the denying pained her. Whenever the mother had to say no to the son, she felt bad. and if I was overconscious of her indulgence even then, and suffered the rushing pangs of guilt that she could inflict upon me with the slightest wounded turn of her lip, I was too happily obtuse and venal to let her cease. She reminded me daily that I was her sole son, her reason for living, and that if she were to lose me in either body or spirit, she wished that God would mercifully smite her, strike her down like a weak branch. So you can see in this paragraph the deep relation between mother and son, and how she pampered him, and how he was a pampered child, and how there were problems sometimes. Let's move to paragraph 15. In the traditional fashion, she was the house accountant, the maid, the launderer, the disciplinarian, the driver, the secretary, and of course the cook. She was also, she was the launderer, disciplinarian, driver, secretary, cook, of course cook. She was also my first basketball coach. How talented the mother was. Look her character. You can say in a sense this narrative is also a profile writing. In a profile writing, you draw the character of a person. Okay. In South Korea, where girls' high school basketball is a popular spectator sport, she had been a star, the point guard for the national high school team. Look, her mother had played in the high school team that once won the All Asia Championships. I learned this one Saturday. I learned this about this thing one Saturday during the summer, when I asked my father if he would go down to the schoolyard and shoot some baskets with me. I had just finished the 5th grade. Look, his flashback, remembering. I just finished 5th grade and wanted desperately to make the middle school team the coming fall. He called for my mother and sister to come along. When we arrived, my sister immediately ran off to the swings, and I recall being annoyed that my mother wasn't following her. I dribbled. Now look, another feature in this essay is sports vocabulary. There is a lot of sports vocabulary. That is also makes it difficult to understand. I dribbled clumsily around the key on the verge of losing control of the ball. Now he is describing how her mother played basketball and how she taught him how to play, and flung a flat shot that caromed widely off the rim. The ball bounced to my father, who took a few not so graceful dribbles and made an easy layup. When you play basketball, you dribble the ball before you throw. I also don't know all the vocabulary because I don't play basketball. He dribbled out and then drove to the hoop for a layup on the other side. He rebounded his shot and passed the ball to my mother, who had been watching us from the foul line. She turned from the basket and began heading the other way. So this paragraph 15 is remarkable for his sports vocabulary, and again there is flashback. The author is remembering his past, how when he was in class 5, his mother had helped him to form a basketball team, and then how he realized that his mother was a wonderful player. She was cook, accountant, player, driver. She was a really talented lady. Paragraph 17. After a few steps, she turned around, and now again look, see the fluctuation of time. After a few steps, she turned around, and from where the professional three-point line must be now, she's playing, she effortlessly flipped the ball up in a two-handed set shot. Its flight truer and higher than I had witnessed from any boy or man. The ball arched cleanly into the hoop, stiffly popping the chain-link net. All afternoon, she reigned in shot after shot as my father and I scrambled after her. So paragraph 17 also describes how fantastic basketball player her mother was. So it is remarkable for sports vocabulary, as I said. Let's read paragraph 18. When we got home from the playground, my mother showed me the photograph album of her team's championship run. 4 years I kept it in my room, the photograph. On the same shelf, that housed the scrapbooks I made of basketball stars. See, his mother was a basketball star, with magazine clippings of slick players like Bubbles Hawkins and Pistol Pete and George Gervin. Now, there is something called Kairos. Here, I want to talk about this. Kairos is the cultural setting, the time, and one way to understand the Kairos of this writing is knowing about who these players were. Bubble Hawkins, who was the player, one was the time. Pistol Pete and George Gervin. I don't know about them, but if you Google and know what players they were, where they played, how they played, you will know the cultural milieu, the cultural occasion in which the events happen. So Kairos is the events surrounding the writing. Let's see paragraph 19. It puzzled me how much she considered her own history to be immaterial. In this essay, one thing the author does, if you pay attention, the writer creates his mother's history. There is one way. Can you create your parents' history? One assignment can be in this lesson. You talk to your parents if they are with you, or phone them and write a page or two about your parents' history. Go back to the childhood and look, you will see fantastic things. It puzzled me how much she considered her own history to be immaterial, not important, and if she never patently diminished herself, she was able to finesse a kind of self-removal by speaking of my father. Self-removal. Women sacrifice themselves for the family. My father, whenever she could, she jealously recounted his excellence as a student in medical school and reminded me each night before I started my homework of how hard he drove himself in his work to make a life for us. Another, this is Voices from the Margin, and you see the author is a Korean-born author. So you see in this paragraph, you read about the struggle of the parents. So the mother told him how his father struggled as a medical student. Look the line. How hard he drove himself in his work to make a life for us. Father's struggle. She said that because of his Asian face and imperfect English, he was working 2 times the American doctors. Very remarkable. Pay attention, underline and note it down. His father was discriminated racially because he belonged to the Asian race. He had to work 2 shifts to earn the same amount of money that the American people from the mainstream earned. So do you see how this essay presents voices from the margin? How were there the margin? Look, as an Asian immigrants in America, they had to work twice to earn the same amount of money as their white counterparts Americans earned. Pay attention to this line, please. In paragraph 19, we have an example of voice from the margin clearly. I read again. How hard he drove himself in his work to make a life for us. She said that because of his Asian face and imperfect English, he was working 2 times the American doctors. I knew that she was building him up, buttressing him with both genuine admiration and her own brand of anxious braggadocio, and that her overarching concern was that I might fail to see him as she wished me to. In the most dawning light, his pose steadfast and solitary. So the mother wanted the son to look at the father as a role model, and the mother wanted the son to work as hard as the father did. So the time and again, the mother would tell the son about the father's history, father's struggle. So I'll stop at this point. I have done up to paragraph 19, and in the next video, I'll move from paragraph 20. So again, before I stop the video, let me say there are fluctuations from past to present, and mostly we'll see the talk is about sports here again, the sports vocabulary, and the author is recalling his mother's history. He is actually creating his mother's history, and interestingly, there is little space given to the father in this mother's history, but whatever we know about the father is important, because through this information about the father, we come to understand that how the Asians were discriminated and how this essay expresses the voice of the margin. Thank you for watching. Please do leave comments, and if there are questions, you can ask me in the class. Thank you.